Most men want to feel needed because it creates a sense of safety, status, and personal value, and this feeling often becomes a substitute for real security inside systems where worth is measured through usefulness rather than control. Over time, being needed starts to feel like proof of importance, yet this perception is misleading because a system can rely on your output while still limiting your authority, your options, and your freedom of movement. When need is confused with respect, dependence slowly becomes normalized, and restriction begins to feel like recognition rather than constraint. This is how individuals accept heavier workloads without corresponding influence, believing that increased responsibility signals progress while in reality it often signals containment. The system benefits from this confusion because a person who feels needed is less likely to question structure, negotiate boundaries, or plan exits. Fear of losing relevance replaces strategic thinking, and the individual starts protecting the role instead of protecting long-term position. What feels like trust from the system is often just efficient utilization, and once utilization becomes identity, leverage quietly disappears. Inside most systems, praise is not designed to empower but to stabilize behavior, because stability reduces uncertainty and uncertainty threatens continuity, which is the primary objective of any large organization. Individuals who become reliable, efficient, and emotionally predictable are rewarded with positive language, yet this language functions as an anchor rather than a ladder. As the system adapts around their availability, routines are built upon their effort, dependencies grow, and competence is slowly converted into infrastructure that must be maintained rather than repositioned. Infrastructure is protected, not promoted, because moving it introduces risk. This is why highly capable people often feel stuck despite strong performance, as their reliability makes them difficult to replace but also difficult to move. Over time, the system does not see potential, it sees risk management. What appears as appreciation from the inside is often risk containment from the outside, and without understanding this distinction, individuals continue investing energy into roles that offer stability to the system while silently limiting their own strategic mobility. Responsibility is frequently mistaken for power, even though responsibility only increases load while power increases choice, and without choice effort becomes a form of controlled motion rather than progress. A man can be busy, exhausted, and highly productive while remaining structurally weak if his position offers no real alternatives. When options are absent, effort turns into compliance, and compliance removes the ability to delay, refuse, or exit without fear. Systems rarely need to enforce obedience directly when fear of loss already governs behavior. This is how individuals become trapped in cycles of overperformance without negotiation leverage, believing that consistent delivery will eventually be rewarded while ignoring the structural reality that reward follows replaceability, not sacrifice. Without options, every demand feels urgent, every request feels personal, and every boundary feels dangerous to assert. Over time, the individual loses strategic distance and becomes reactive, operating under pressure instead of shaping outcomes, which further reinforces dependence and reduces long-term control. Efficiency often becomes a trap because it increases usefulness, and usefulness attracts demand, filling calendars and fragmenting time until deep thinking becomes impossible. Fragmented time destroys long-term planning, and without long-term planning wealth, leverage, and strategic mobility cannot form. This is why many men work harder each year while remaining in the same position, as intensity replaces direction and speed replaces perspective. Systems reward visibility more than value because visibility creates narratives, and narratives influence perception, while quiet competence prevents crises and therefore produces no story to be noticed. Those who solve emergencies are remembered, while those who prevent them are forgotten, despite being more valuable to stability. Over time, this dynamic pushes capable individuals further into operational roles, distancing them from decision points where power actually accumulates. Without proximity to decisions, effort compounds only into fatigue, not influence, and the individual remains trapped in a loop of execution without control over outcomes. Stoic discipline becomes practical at this stage because it separates internal value from external signals, preventing praise, urgency, or pressure from dictating emotional response. When emotional volatility is reduced, judgment improves, patterns become visible, and incentives reveal themselves without distortion. Most organizational behavior is driven by incentives rather than intention, as people act to protect comfort, status, and access, and once these incentives are understood, resentment dissolves into clarity. Silence, delayed response, and controlled availability begin to function as leverage rather than risk, shifting tempo and pressure without confrontation. Boundaries stop being declared and start being demonstrated through behavior, forcing recalculation inside the system. This connects directly to wealth mindset, where wealth represents stored optionality rather than income alone, allowing distance from urgency and better decision-making over time. By reducing impulsive reactions and preserving energy, individuals regain control over time, attention, and direction, which is the real foundation of strategic freedom. Optionality is the quiet source of power inside any system because it removes urgency from decision-making and replaces reaction with choice. When a man has alternatives, he does not rush, and when he does not rush, he negotiates from a position of calm rather than fear. This calm is often misread as confidence, but in reality it is structural security, built through time, skills, savings, reputation, or parallel opportunities that exist outside the immediate environment. Without optionality, even small pressures feel threatening, and individuals begin to trade long-term advantage for short-term relief by accepting unfavorable terms, increased workload, or emotional compromise. Systems sense this vulnerability quickly and adjust expectations accordingly. Optionality changes this dynamic because it alters the system's calculation, introducing uncertainty about compliance and continuity. When the system is uncertain, it slows down, listens more carefully, and offers better terms to maintain stability. This shift rarely happens through confrontation but emerges naturally when alternatives are real and visible through behavior, not declarations. The ability to pause, decline, or delay without panic reshapes perception and restores control. Time is the first and most underestimated form of optionality, because control over time directly determines the quality of thinking and decision-making. When time is fragmented by constant demands, messages, and interruptions, the mind adapts to urgency and loses the capacity for strategic depth. This creates a state where action replaces planning and responsiveness replaces direction. Many men remain trapped in this condition, believing that speed equals productivity, while ignoring that speed without clarity only accelerates exhaustion. Systems benefit from fragmented attention because fragmented individuals are easier to manage, redirect, and overload without resistance. Regaining control over time requires deliberate reduction of availability, selective engagement, and tolerance for discomfort when expectations are unmet. These adjustments feel risky at first because they challenge established patterns, but over time they create space for deeper analysis, long-term positioning, and asset building. Once time is protected, thinking improves, and improved thinking becomes the foundation for leverage rather than constant output. Wealth, when viewed strategically, is not defined by income but by stored flexibility that allows distance from immediate pressure. Income sustains survival, but wealth sustains choice, enabling individuals to act according to long-term interest rather than short-term necessity. Many men chase higher income while remaining structurally fragile because their financial life depends entirely on continuous performance within a single system. This dependence amplifies fear and encourages compliance, reducing the willingness to set boundaries or negotiate assertively. Wealth alters this equation by introducing resilience, allowing patience, and reducing emotional attachment to any single outcome. Patience improves decision quality, and improved decisions compound over time into stronger positions. This compounding effect is invisible in the short term, which is why it is ignored in favor of immediate gains. However, systems respond differently to individuals who are not desperate, as desperation signals weakness while patience signals stability. Stability attracts better opportunities without pursuit. Impulse is the enemy of compounding, whether it appears as emotional reactions, instant replies, overcommitment, or spending to relieve discomfort. Impulsive behavior creates noise, and noise disrupts consistency, making long-term accumulation impossible. Systems exploit impulsive individuals because their behavior is predictable under pressure, allowing control through urgency and reward cycles. Restraint interrupts this pattern by preserving energy and attention, both of which are finite resources. When energy is protected, deeper work becomes possible, and deeper work produces rare value that is harder to replace or replicate. Rare value increases bargaining power, reduces dependence, and expands optionality. This shift does not require extreme discipline or isolation, but consistent refusal to react emotionally to every signal. Over time, restraint reshapes behavior, behavior reshapes perception, and perception reshapes opportunity. What appears as passivity from the outside is often deliberate control from the inside. Power is often misunderstood as dominance over others, but in practice power is the ability to control one's own time, attention, and direction without external coercion. This form of power is quiet and rarely recognized because it does not announce itself, yet it shapes outcomes more reliably than authority or force. Individuals who possess this control move differently inside systems, speaking less, observing more, and engaging selectively. Their behavior introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty forces systems to negotiate rather than dictate. This dynamic explains why some individuals receive flexibility, autonomy, and better terms without asking, while others struggle despite constant effort. The difference is not personality but structure. When structure supports independence, behavior becomes calm, and calm alters interaction patterns. Over time, this calm creates a reputation for stability, making the individual a variable rather than a fixed resource. Variables are consulted. Fixed resources are consumed. Silence becomes a strategic asset when it is no longer used as avoidance but as control over timing, because timing determines pressure and pressure determines who reacts and who decides. Individuals who speak immediately often reveal urgency, while those who pause introduce uncertainty that shifts the balance of interaction without confrontation. Systems are highly sensitive to tempo, and when tempo slows, expectations soften and demands become negotiable. This effect is subtle but cumulative, as repeated exposure to controlled silence forces recalibration of how availability is perceived. Over time, silence communicates that attention is not free and that response is intentional rather than automatic. This changes how requests are framed, how deadlines are set, and how authority is exercised. Silence does not create power by itself, but it protects the space where power can grow, allowing decisions to be made deliberately rather than defensively. When silence is paired with consistency, it becomes a boundary that does not need explanation, reducing friction and preserving energy for higher leverage actions. Boundaries function effectively only when they are enforced through behavior rather than language, because language invites negotiation while behavior sets expectations. Many individuals attempt to establish boundaries through explanation, justification, or emotional appeal, but these approaches weaken position by signaling uncertainty. Systems respond to patterns, not intentions, and when patterns demonstrate selective engagement and controlled response, the system adjusts without resistance. This adjustment feels uncomfortable at first because it challenges learned habits of compliance, yet discomfort is often the signal that dependency is being reduced. As boundaries stabilize, workload becomes more predictable, interruptions decrease, and focus improves. This improved focus allows for higher quality output delivered with less noise, reinforcing credibility rather than availability. Over time, boundaries shift perception from always accessible to strategically reliable, which increases respect without requiring assertion. Respect that emerges from consistency is more durable than respect demanded through confrontation. Decision-making quality improves dramatically when emotional attachment to outcomes is reduced, as attachment creates bias that distorts risk assessment and prioritization. Stoic detachment does not remove ambition, but it removes desperation, allowing ambition to operate within rational limits. When outcomes are no longer tied to identity, losses become data rather than personal failures, and gains become opportunities rather than validation. This mindset transforms feedback into information, reducing emotional volatility and preserving cognitive resources for analysis. Systems favor individuals who remain stable under pressure because stability reduces unpredictability and conflict. Over time, emotional regulation becomes a form of influence, as calm behavior during uncertainty reassures stakeholders and shifts trust. Trust earned through stability is more valuable than trust earned through performance spikes, because it persists across changing conditions. This persistence creates continuity and leverage even when environments shift. Career mobility depends less on raw skill and more on positioning relative to decision makers, because decisions allocate resources and shape trajectories. Individuals who remain embedded exclusively in execution layers rarely influence outcomes, regardless of competence, while those closer to decision points shape direction even with limited involvement. This reality often feels unfair, but it reflects structural mechanics rather than moral judgment. Moving closer to decision points requires visibility of judgment rather than volume of output, which is achieved through selective contribution, timing, and restraint. Over-contribution dilutes impact, while focused input at critical moments amplifies influence. Over time, this approach shifts perception from worker to advisor, altering how the system engages. Advisors are consulted. Workers are assigned. The difference lies not in effort but in proximity to choice. Reputation compounds slowly and is shaped more by consistency than intensity, as systems remember patterns rather than isolated events. Consistent behavior under pressure signals reliability, while erratic spikes create uncertainty that limits trust. Many individuals attempt to accelerate reputation through overperformance, but this often backfires by reinforcing expectations of constant availability. Sustainable reputation is built through measured delivery, controlled engagement, and predictable standards that do not fluctuate with mood or circumstance. This predictability reduces monitoring, granting autonomy over time. Autonomy increases efficiency without increasing workload, allowing energy to be redirected toward strategic initiatives rather than maintenance tasks. As autonomy grows, leverage increases, creating a reinforcing loop where trust leads to freedom and freedom leads to better outcomes. This loop is fragile when rushed but resilient when developed patiently. Systems respond more to patterns than to statements, which is why consistency over time reshapes outcomes more effectively than sudden assertion. When behavior remains steady under changing conditions, it becomes easier for others to predict interaction, and predictability reduces friction. Reduced friction leads to fewer interruptions, fewer justifications, and fewer unnecessary negotiations, freeing attention for higher-level thinking. This process often feels slow because its effects are cumulative rather than immediate, but cumulative change is more durable than rapid shifts driven by emotion. Individuals who understand this resist the urge to force change and instead allow structure to adapt gradually around their behavior. Over time, the system stops testing boundaries and begins respecting them, not because of confrontation but because resistance becomes inefficient. Efficiency works in both directions, and when respecting boundaries becomes the most efficient option, the system chooses it naturally. Attention functions as a form of currency inside organizations, as it determines which ideas, individuals, and risks are prioritized. When attention is scattered, value becomes diluted, and when attention is focused, value concentrates. Many individuals unintentionally devalue themselves by distributing attention freely, responding to every request and engaging in every discussion. This creates noise and reduces signal strength. By contrast, selective attention increases perceived importance, as scarcity amplifies value. When attention is controlled, contributions carry more weight, and fewer words produce greater impact. This dynamic is often misinterpreted as confidence or authority, but it is simply the result of disciplined allocation of cognitive resources. Over time, focused attention reshapes how others listen, shifting interactions from reactive exchanges to deliberate engagement. This shift strengthens positioning without requiring explicit effort. Long-term positioning requires tolerance for ambiguity, because strategic outcomes rarely provide immediate feedback. Many men abandon effective strategies prematurely because results are not visible quickly, mistaking silence for failure. In reality, silence often indicates absorption, as systems take time to adjust calculations. Remaining steady during this phase requires trust in process rather than validation, which is difficult in environments conditioned for rapid response. Those who endure this uncertainty without reverting to old habits gain a quiet advantage, as their behavior becomes associated with stability rather than volatility. Stability attracts responsibility of a different kind, responsibility tied to judgment rather than output. This shift marks a transition from execution to influence, where decisions shape workload instead of workload shaping decisions. Patience becomes leverage when others exhaust themselves through constant motion. Risk perception changes significantly when alternatives exist, as the presence of options reframes loss from catastrophe to inconvenience. Without options, individuals exaggerate risk and underestimate opportunity, leading to conservative behavior that protects the present at the expense of the future. Systems benefit from this conservatism because it ensures continuity, but individuals suffer stagnation. Building alternatives quietly reduces perceived risk, allowing for bolder yet calculated moves. These moves often appear effortless from the outside because they are supported by preparation rather than impulse. Over time, reduced fear improves judgment, and improved judgment compounds into better outcomes. This compounding effect is subtle but decisive, separating those who remain trapped in cycles of effort from those who gradually gain control over trajectory. Strategic distance is created when individuals step back from constant engagement and observe interactions without immediate participation. This distance reveals patterns that are invisible at close range, including power flows, influence networks, and decision triggers. Many men never achieve this perspective because they are consumed by execution, leaving no space for analysis. Creating distance requires deliberate reduction of involvement, which feels counterintuitive in performance-driven cultures but yields clarity over time. Clarity enables anticipation, and anticipation allows proactive positioning rather than reactive adjustment. As anticipation improves, interactions become smoother, and fewer actions are required to achieve desired outcomes. This efficiency frees additional time and energy, reinforcing the cycle of distance, clarity, and control. This is not about working less, withdrawing from effort, or escaping responsibility. It is about changing position inside the system. When position changes, effort produces different results without requiring more energy. Systems do not respond to intention or emotion, they respond to structure, incentives, and patterns of behavior repeated over time. When structure favors distance, clarity, and choice, control returns quietly, without confrontation or permission. This process does not create instant outcomes, but it compounds stability, leverage, and autonomy. Wherever systems exist, these mechanics repeat. Those who understand them stop reacting, stop chasing validation, and begin moving deliberately, with time, attention, and direction under control.